expertise to do the project, this is where we can jump in and help along the way.
Enable our partners' growth through scalable and repeatable implementation and technical services.
Taking the partners on their growth journey.
We can really help a partner that's doing a particular kind of project for the first time by working through it with them.
We make it as easy as possible, and typically this is through a one-touch click into our cloud commerce marketplace.
Our services are repeatable. They are fixed scope. There's no unpredictability.
We look to take what is sometimes complex technology solutions, and we essentially make it simple for our partners to leverage those different tools through our package offerings, so we can come in and work as an extension to your team and deliver those solutions to your customers.
We have the expertise to be able to take on project work for you if you just don't have the bandwidth for it right now, or we can teach you how to do it.
And that's where Pax8 Academy comes in. We've got programs that help the partner in the way they want to learn. We've got all this free on-demand content.
We have a number of subject matter experts keeping up to speed with the latest developments and enhancements, features and functionality.
There's always going to be vendors added, and if it has our approval, that means it's going to serve you.
If you're interested in learning more, simply check out the Pax8 Professional Services engagement SKU in the Pax8 Marketplace at no cost, and our team will be in touch.
Help propel your business forward right out of the cloud commerce marketplace at Pax8.
What's up, everyone? Happy Wednesday and welcome to the game on Pax8 Live, a show where we discuss all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. Busted with my phone, forgotten to put on silent. Anyways, welcome back to the game after a long break. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday or just time off if you don't celebrate. But nonetheless, we are back and we're going to talk about the security of your Microsoft tenant. Because as we say all the time, when you buy your Microsoft tenant, it comes to you in the least secure state it could possibly be in, which perhaps is a discussion for another day, but we're going to have Nick Ross on here in a few minutes to talk through how do we secure the Microsoft tenant, look at a tool he's putting together to help you uncover where your Microsoft tenant might have some issues, make some suggestions, and alignment to CIS. And you know we love some CIS alignment. So let's get Matt in here. Let's kick the show off.
Man, Dom Kirby, it's great to be back. I've only been recorded fake Matt up till now, but I'm actually live, so it's great to be here. Yeah, the show today, Dom, I'm so excited about this because just to maybe level set for everyone, the challenge is, to Dom's point, when Microsoft tenants or Google or whatever it might be that you buy come to you, they usually come to you in the most usable format. They do those things as vendors to make it sellable so that people buy it, it's usable, the user experience is good, the security isn't too stringent, and most of those things have just been bolted on. So you wind up in a situation where everything you buy is not secure by default. And CISA, in their rhetoric, was secure by design and secure by default. The gap is that when you're trying to look for what is a good risk posture, what is a good security setting, what should I do, you don't often know how that aligns to the goals you're trying to meet. Like, what do you mean by that? Well, the goals I'm trying to meet are compliance requirements, contractual requirements, things that are driving my insurance decisions, things to those nature. I don't have the ability to say, yes, it aligns with that. So using frameworks like CIS, which is my life work and what I spend most of my time on is frameworks, it only gets us to the point of what we should be as a goal. It doesn't get us to the point of how should Microsoft should be configured for that, or how this tool should be configured, or SentinelOne, or CrowdStrike, or all those other things. And so today we're going to delve in just a little bit, Dom, into one company that I know that is digging into doing this. Now, before we go further, I'm in a big FTC disclosure moment in my life. And so I will say I am an investor in Cloud Capsule, but that is not the reason I've chosen to talk about this topic, but I'd rather at least disclose it from a conflict of interest perspective up front. Let you make the decision, as Lockpicking Lawyer says. Dom, I'm excited about today's topic and the overall.
I think Lockpicking Lawyer has shares in Master Lock. Just curious. Like he's gotta.
I would bet not unless he's shorting them, right?
You think he
I have to
shorts it
imagine
before each video comes out?
yeah,
You know,
100%.
gotta be some strategy there. Anyway, well, let's hear some
Anyways.
words from Robin Harris.
Are you ready?
I want to talk about a current event that's coming on the other side of the CrowdStrike incident. Delta is suing CrowdStrike because they said they lost from $350 to $500 million because of the incident. And then CrowdStrike and Microsoft are responding, saying that other airlines recovered sooner and had a much less significant loss, but Delta did not allow them to support them in the recovery process. And the thing that I want to dive into, and this is relevant for us, because we can't always prevent an incident from occurring, but how prepared are we to recover when an incident occurs? Do you have an incident response plan? Do you have a business continuity DR plan? Have you done some testing and trained your people of what to do in the event that something happens and now you gotta isolate the threat and you gotta do all these things to recover and then you gotta get your business back up to running business as usual? Have you planned that out? And for a lot of businesses, that just seems like, it feels like overhead, because in our mind we wanna say, well, that could never happen. But we live in the day and age where the impossible thing that we think could never happen, it happens. Just having cyber insurance is not enough, because if you have cyber insurance, what they're going to be looking for is, have you put the right controls in place that justifies them now giving you millions of dollars to cover your loss? Because I can tell you for a fact that if they can come back and say, well, you didn't have any business continuity in place, or you didn't have the right incident response plan, or you missed this, or you didn't report the incident in a timely manner, so you got fined, so we're not going to pay you this much, we're going to only pay you this much. So it's really, really important for businesses to not look at this as overhead. It's a necessary part of doing business. And I'm going to tell you a little, it's funny, but it's sad. Dentist office. You know, for US, medical falls under HIPAA. Those are legal requirements that you have to put in place to protect medical data. Their business continuity plan and their DR plan for their data was to back it up on a USB drive and put it in a baggie and put it in the freezer. That sounds like that's a terrible business continuity DR plan. But this is what they were doing. I'm not suggesting that any of you would do something that simplistic, but I'm just saying, people have our data and we're counting on them to protect that data and to be able to recover it if there's an incident. And it's a responsibility. And in some industries, it's a legal obligation. So we're going to see how this legal event plays out between Delta and CrowdStrike and Microsoft. But it's just interesting to take note of the whole concept of business continuity and disaster recovery and how that might play out in your business. Are you prepared for an incident?
Time to level up. Level up.
Okay, before we introduce Nick Ross, which everyone here knows, so it's fine, I got triggered by that one and I wanted to add some additional thoughts on this conversation. So I do 100% agree, and Robin Harris tackled this like amazingly, right? The challenge, and I hope you guys really enjoyed that segment. But for me, there's an additional component that I think will play out in the future, and maybe not come up in this case, but as things go on. Why did Delta have a large problem? Obviously, the things she brought up, but also because she had pets versus cattle's problem, or at least that they had a pets versus cattle problem. When you think about what is pets versus cattle, pets are things you keep around. You love them. You pay an inordinate amount of money to keep them around if they get sick or injured. Cattle, you don't. You just get new cattle, and they are expendable. They change, and they have their commoditized aspect. When you think about old code development and legacy architecture, everything was a pet. You had a server named Bob that was your web server, and you had another server that was your database server named Sally, and those two communicated, and that's how it worked. And you had to bring them back exactly as Bob and Sally in order to function. Modern approaches start using more ephemeral workloads. They start using other things that can be designed to use function services that don't have the same core components. But additionally, even if they were servers that still needed to exist, they could just be brought back infrastructure as code to do their things if they were treated more like cattle. So I postulate there's some degree of, hey, Delta, had you actually kept up to date with your systems and stayed up to date without all that tech debt, then the impact of this would have been significantly less to you as well. And I'm definitely summarizing, but the point is that we have a lot of legacy debt that causes differences in how people experience that outcome as well that could come into mind on here. And if I was using function services, platform services, CI/CD pipelines that allowed for infrastructure as code, I would just spin them back up again. I don't care. And the CrowdStrike bug was already gone by then.
Well, and devices too, right? We saw pictures of like Delta employees at the
Oh,
airport
yeah.
kneeling at the little check-in kiosk, from the damn BitLocker key, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, there's no just burn that
And I'm
thing
not trying to
down
make light of their
remotely.
pain. Sorry.
No, but like, why do we have to why can I not reset a public-facing piece of hardware just like that, right?
Yeah.
Was an interesting take too.
Which came out at Ignite, right? And maybe since we are
Right.
trying to talk about things that people who are actually up to date to things, not just Matt who reads articles every now and again, we brought on Nick Ross because he's the smart guy in the room. So we figured we'd legitimize ourselves by that. Nick, welcome to the show. You want to introduce yourself, brother?
Yeah, for sure. Always good to see you guys. Appreciate you having me on. Definitely happy to dive into Ignite too with the Windows Resiliency Initiative, right? This is all that topic is about, is around the CrowdStrike incident. But yeah, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Nick. I'm currently the CEO of Cloud Capsule. It's a startup, began this year, and we can certainly get into that today. But a lot of you probably know me from my YouTube channel, which is T-365. Do a lot of educational content around MSP space and Microsoft on that channel, and it's really turned into a security focus now. But I have a lot of various productivity information, user onboard, offboard automation, most recently in that bucket. And prior to that, I've worked at a couple of MSPs and was also part of Pax8 for a good 6 years, almost there too. So long career, but again, happy to be here.
Yeah. And actually, to summarize it, you and I had been talking about what is such a key premise of how I think the SMB solves cybersecurity, in my opinion. If you think about it, I talk about if I started a company tomorrow, there's almost zero chance I have a server. I mean, almost zero. I have an identity centric approach. I'm using something like SaaS software for the predominance of my line of business applications. And I'm using things like modern development pipelines we just talked about if I am creating code, right? And I have to imagine that sounds a lot like you, but you and I met many years ago and talked about this. This was in like 2018, 2019. We were talking about these things. And we were saying, but with cloud, I can automate it all. Like at some point, I can use Graph API to manage and automate all of it. And you've seen wins like CIPP with Kelvin and the things that Kelvin Techler is doing around that. And you've been heavily involved in that with me this whole time. But it's this belief that when we talk about the scale and enormity of securing people and applying safeguards and applying controls, you almost have haves and have-nots, Nick. You have haves that are all API centric. I can do everything in a pretty modern application programming interface way. And you have people that I have to go, yeah. I'm running 2003 server over there, right? And I got an XP box out there. Like the difference in those worlds of what I could do to automate that is so linear. And what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it's kind of the mission that you're serving right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is funny. Like you mentioned, it was like 2018 in the Partner Advisory Council of Pax8. You're at Iconic, kind of talking about infrastructure as code and understanding, how we can look at these lenses and really scaling out if you are looking towards modern infrastructure. And a lot of that's a thesis behind Cloud Capsule in the sense of, taking a look at this cloud first approach, but also pairing it with more of a preventative versus reactive capability that we really want to transpose down to the community because we have a lot of tool proliferation today. We try to fill a bunch of security gaps, with tools that fulfill a certain function. And I'm not saying they're not valuable by any means, but the noise that they do creates dysfunction. It creates actually worse security and weaker security across your platform versus having a preventative mindset and a proactive approach. Certainly aligning to standards like CIS give you purpose and where you spend your time and priority, which we'll get into as well. But fundamentally, if you are very modern and very delineated on or bifurcated in the sense of your focus area or how you're thinking about your management and your customer base, when I worked at Summit Technology as well too, we didn't have any servers in our ecosystem, and we were serving around 90 clients with 2 help desk members, and sometimes they didn't even have a ticket. So it was a crazy experience to see that because it's just so low overhead. If you configure it right, you've got Intune set up for workstation deployments. You're doing a lot of things that take a lot of manual time to really bucketize and get into, especially when we talk about mirroring infrastructure as code with compliance standards as well too. And being able to say, this is the desired state that I want to be in, and I always want you to keep me there. And that's a huge part of the thesis behind the longer term vision.
Yeah, that's cool. Dom, you lived Microsoft 365 centric, and you and I've presented on stage a whole bunch about what that world looks like different than the server, AD extensibility, hybrid extensibility through Microsoft, like the differences in those. Like, why don't you speak a bit towards what the challenge though is? Go.
That was we wanted no servers. We were eliminating servers as fast as we could possibly eliminate servers. What we ran into was the very same tech that we just sort of jested Delta about. It's like this janky, weird line of business application made by some random Eastern European company that's long gone, runs the whole business, right? And the idea of modernizing that is just non-existent. Putting it in Azure would be too expensive, or it won't run well. Like, you're just stuck. That's typically who we had with legacy infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So as much as we wanted to get to everyone to desired state config, so you can do things like regression testing, you're just stuck with customers that have junk, and you have to decide, am I going to keep customers that have junk, right?
Yeah. And then when it comes to the cloud side, anybody ever seen that fancy parenthetical preview that shows up every now and again in Office 365 that has this new feature? You have no idea what it does, and it's changed, or it moves to another screen. And all. The challenge is then combined with the fact that there's not multi-tenancy at the same scale yet. That's a lot of what CIPP tried to solve and Lighthouse are trying to solve. So the cloud challenges don't make it instantly gone. They just make it scalable from an API perspective. Now, that challenge means to Nick, and I think I love what you said, which is it gives you purpose. Applying to CIS or NIST CSF or other things give you purpose. In this case, the purpose is, what's the most return for reducing my risk? And how can I prove to someone in a third party that I'm doing those things I said I'm going to do? And that's where that correlation exists, right? That's the piece that needs to be done. But when we come back to the challenge of cloud, there's also all of these things of being able to actually, no one's done the last mile work. What do I mean by that? So at PAX 8, for everybody that's heard about it forever, which means it's probably fake and I'll never ever get it done, which it's been 2.5 years on this project, we've been working with CIS to try to come up with a way to map tools, products, and services to their capabilities in CIS. That means if I have this wrench, can it turn that size bolt? That's what we're trying to do. If CIS says 10.1, thou shalt deploy anti-malware, what are all the things that look like anti-malware? The problem is, as a practitioner, even if I solve that piece, there is still the aspect of trying to solve which setting. How should it be set? What about all these new features? When they do come in, how do I change those? What's the risk they propose to me? How do they? And so I depend, at least in my efforts with PAX 8 and CIS for this mapping, and with CyberRise Inc., our charity, for this mapping process, commercial companies will have to do the last mile. Sentinel-1 will have to at some point say, this is how Sentinel-1 needs to be configured, or someone else will have to do it. And what we're starting to see is those two can actually coexist. If someone that is in commercial interest does that mapping and then says, here's how we'll do the API settings to check for that mapping, and maybe ultimately one day says, here's how you can configure that or does it for you, you can now see a world where that last mile isn't on every practitioner's plate to solve. And more importantly, the contextual lens with which I'm looking at those things is identical for every single user tenant. I want to let that sink in. They're identical, which means if someone can do that for you, it literally becomes a system that kind of goes from here's the control I'm trying to meet, here's the setting in this platform, that platform, that platform, that platform, and here's what you need to do to achieve that. And then it also proves that it was done. There could be some historical elements of these things. So I'm not just saying Cloud Capsule. That's
well,
one
that
of
regression
them,
testing
yeah.
piece is massive. Like that. So if you're developing something and you do a release, you do a regression test to see, did I break anything in the process of doing the new thing? Hopefully you're doing regression testing. No comment. But you can apply that same thing to your security. Merrill did this with Meister, his open source regression testing tool that looks at your entry config and says, hey, this is no longer the setting you said you wanted it to be. Right. So if you can combine that with the ability to apply those fixes, or at least alert you now in near real time. I had Joe on the show while you were away, Matt, and we were talking about how these audits are just these points in time. But if GRC or tooling was really empowering, hey, this is a problem now, then you're constantly fixing problems as they come up instead of 3 months for the SOC 2 audit,
reporting on the failure to your auditor, and the
right.
threat actor that pwned you because of that failure, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I don't. If you guys have ever, we've all gone through our own audits for SOC 2 and other compliance standards, and I've always come out of there, no disrespect to any of the processes or anything, like there's a lot of gaps here still. If I was thinking about this regular business of this is a snapshot in time. Your investigation of our evidence was okay. In some
Cursory.
cases it's better than others. Cursory. In some cases it relies on self-attestation, which I don't think is going to be, as we continue to move towards higher and higher standards and different regulations, like CMMC is driving a lot down into other compliance standards in other businesses. But fundamentally, when we take a look at that, even thinking about, to your point, Matt, of these vendors mapping to CIS as a whole, when we look at that, just the Microsoft lens, there's obviously a lot of gaps that you still have if you try to map to Microsoft. Even if you were a full E5 user trying to go first party for everything, it'd still be pretty hard to fulfill.
Well, part of that, Nick, is because two things. One, on CIS specifically, I think only like 40-something% are purely technical. It's like 46% are purely technical. And then the rest of them are administrative and procedural. And while I think there will be paths where, as companies go forward, yours included, you'll start adding those procedural things as capabilities. Think back on your user onboarding methodology and what that does. That adds some procedural capacitance to those other aspects of it, right? And so then you go further and say that every safeguard has some administrative component because some jackleg's got to go do it, right? And so from a technical perspective, and in this case, I would insert Cloud Capsule as jackleg, because that's what it's going to help do in my mind, or the companies like you that do that allow you to see those gaps in that space and allow me to prioritize those things or automate those things where possible for the technical components that require some procedural administrative aspect to happen that now doesn't necessarily play out the same way because I can automate it.
Well, and that's a progression, right? That we always recommend, for people who are looking to get started who haven't done anything yet. It's like you have processes in place that are really manual today, but you at least have a process, right? You always start there and think about, well, what's my next best thing that I could go automate or get some help with to fill in my time, or fill in the security impact that would have if I were able to get, if we talk about Control One as an example, an asset inventory, I could track all that in a spreadsheet, at the most basic layer. I could try to track it all. I could try to manually collect all of it.
Yeah.
But what's the next step up for me, and what assets do I want to track, right? You personally have a whole matrix around, kind of a thought process.
Let's say, don't try to trigger me on assets.
I think Matt has more assets at his house than we have at the office.
I have 214 assets at my house right now. Yes, I have the count. I use Rumble. Thank you, Heath. And no, he does not pay me. See that conflict of interest disclosure? I digress.
Nice.
But I think that's just one way to even look at it, Nick. And to your point, there's going to be assets outside of Microsoft. There's other things. But what if you could imagine that more and more of these tools become automatable like that, where the collective intelligence can be brought together, right? Like, for example, let's go back to even Microsoft. Microsoft has 3 databases for the predominance of services we're going to use around devices. What are they? Number one is the Active Directory or the Azure Active Directory Entra ID implementation of that device. But then you also have another version of it that exists in Autopilot that's tied to its hash and is its core aspect of that device. And then you have another version of it that's represented in Intune. If you do not believe me, go to look at your Autopilot devices page, select a device, go to the right, and you will see device in Azure, device in Intune, and they are different assets that are being linked together by that core autopilot. So Nick, now you take into, I have devices that are in Sentinel-1, or I have devices that are in my WatchGuard portal, I have devices that are in my, right? You get into this world where the device space, if brought together in some platform that's doing these things, allows you to kind of normalize that whole device layer and understand, okay, these are my IoT devices that I'm over here. I'm not going to include these in my list, but these other tools, I'm going to make them together. And maybe at some point we can get down to all those 9 databases I'm looking at. Here's the actual source of truth of a device, right? And so you're starting to see people try to solve that challenge as well. Because if you don't, you can't say what it's all applied to. So what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that, if I've triggered anything?
Yeah, no, I mean that's the heightened visibility, right? If you just have this lens and these really rich data objects, right? That's really all the thesis have been trying to articulate for years now. If I have a user record, even talk about device or user, I have a user record, I could say, hey, they have MFA being enforced to them, they have it registered, they're not risky from the sign-in logs, they have their mailbox being backed up, they are doing their security awareness training. You're starting to combine, disparate tools into this central, again, unified record that you mentioned there, which is a really central lens for then how you make your next best decision. But just getting to that visibility is really hard, just to begin with. And the same thing with the device layer. If we do have that level of visibility, then we can get into, well, do we have the proper policies pushed down to them? Are they configured to meet these CAS policies or controls that map back? And we're not just saying that we think they are because this customer's in Sentinel-1, and we have EDR protection for them, and it's definitely it's a good start to even have that, because I don't think a lot of people could say with 100% confidence that all my customers have agents deployed to these devices. But then what about your siloed, devices, and getting into, concepts of BYOD and, just the whole remote and hybrid workforce? Like you start to peel back these layers here that you really need to have a progression path to move into. And just having that visibility gives you a good stepping off point to say, this is my next best, action to take against that, and having that, centrally in
Well,
a
in this
place.
in the spirit of less like rhetoric and more tactical, why don't we just show people what we're talking about as one of these platforms? Now, listen, is it where it needs to be, y'all? No, it's in its infancy. There will be other players doing more as this continues to go. And so, Nick, obviously, I don't like to vote just on one player, but I will say
Yeah.
that this is an example of where the world could go. And yeah, go ahead. Let's take it away. Show them what we're working with here, and we may make fun of
Yeah.
some things as I see your mappings. We'll see.
Yeah, Matt always
I
gives
did
me.
promise I would make fun of you if I disagreed with a mapping, so like, it's fair.
No, you're good. I want to call it out. So, yeah, to run an assessment on a tenant, really streamline this, you can really just type in a domain here, and you're able to sign in with a admin in the account. Use our Face ID here. I get in. I don't have that turned on. And then once you do, you present with some permissions for the read access that we're doing in the tenant. And this is where Matt mentioned as well too, we're tapping into an API layer here to look at your posture management and also get into some of that granular data across users, devices, email, these top level domains. And so you'll notice here that we're flying through these data sets. They're all single tethered, so performance is really nice just from that perspective. But this is actually what's actually mapping against the CIS controls for looking for pass fail values where they're more binary, or at least gathering evidence for the ones that do require, in addition to the evidence, you want to like overlay that with a human to say, this is us validating our asset inventory, or at least monitoring it into its completion. So the high level here, you can see some more of the things that you would want to be paying attention to that relate to your security, but also getting into, to your point earlier, even if we look at EDR displacement as a check for this, we're looking for, these devices to be enrolled into Defender, and we're giving you this indication.
Actually, hold on. I want to call something out because we glossed over it.
Yeah.
You just assessed the tenant, like it's done. We've been
Yeah.
38.
Yeah. That was
Like, and that
that
was
was
not
a
fake 'cause I
live
put
new
my own tenant in
API
here.
being approved.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to clear that. That was really fast. Damn.
Yeah, the average tenant is under 2 minutes, to complete, and some of the largest ones like the sign-in logs you're seeing there. But you can interact with the data, in seconds. It says it's returning there, and that's a big big differentiator, I think, too, is one consent flow. We're getting over 100 data points, pulling them into the application,
And
mapping
it's
the
still
CIS.
refreshing up top, right? You just build
Yeah, it's
context
on
as
the
you
sign-in log.
build and get more data. Yeah.
Yep. So the sign-in logs take the longest just from Microsoft's API, and sometimes they're longer than more in certain time periods. But this is to Matt's
Sure.
point right earlier. This is kind of that lens of, are my devices in Entra? Are they in Defender? Are they in Intune? In a single lens, for this information, because you want to basically be able to detect that across those disparate portals where you have to navigate technically today to 3 different admin portals to see this information, and then cross map them and correlate them based off of. Most people will do host
Nick,
name.
you've just proven to me a 4th database now. I forgot about that one. I didn't realize Defender was its own separate. I mean, I do, but I forgot. So that's 4. So 1 point for Nick for finding one more database than I initially stated. Thank you.
Yeah. And not a lot of people are using this, to your point earlier about multi-tenancy, right? Like, it's hard to adopt Defender to its fullest degree because you don't have the central platform for policy management and for alerting and all of that. And Lighthouse has certainly come a long way in developing more
100%.
of that. But the other thing that we're doing in here is we're allowing you to augment these controls with, kind of your attestation today. And this is where in the future, we do want to continue to integrate to other vendors to have that, layer of them mapping to CIS. And then we are that desired state type of lens as well here too, for the things that we're looking at within the tenant. So you could say, hey, we're actually fulfilling this today. And this is where it gets into, self-attestation again, saying, hey, we're using something like a Cronus to back up email and files.
And it's a current limitation, if you will, of platforms today, right? Because every gap that I have to type something in for, not to beat it up, Nick, I mean this in the most loving way.
Sure.
Once I've checked that off and said I'm good here because I'm using that, it makes the assumption that this is good here. And it's just another dark spot for MSPs to be punched from, right? Because I've now said, oh, Cronus has that. It's not managed here. And I'm not making an advocation that you have to use all Microsoft Defender. I absolutely believe in spreading that around. But the point is that as you start checking off something manual that's outside the space, you need to ensure that you have paths and processes in place to validate that constantly too. If it's not done in this platform, then you still have to do it. It doesn't just go away because you wrote its name in the list. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox for.
But I think there's a future version of this that's because Microsoft is the center, right? That's where everyone actually works. So you could spider through it and be like, oh, there's an Acronis or a Dropsuite or whatever enterprise app. Let me go to the Dropsuite integration and find this customer and pull all that. Like, so something like this starts to map everything together into one single pane of glass.
Yeah, we definitely recommend, hey, you want to review what we call annotations, right, on a periodic basis. You need to schedule that.
Sure.
You need to have this as reviewed. It's quarterly, biannually, something like that, especially if you're coming in here also maybe saying this is not checked off. It's an assumed risk for us right now.
Sure.
And this method and reviewing that. But it's also helped drive, we've actually reviewed everything. And more specifically, that comes into play when we talk about our mappings to things like CIS here as well. Given you want to kind of start to develop this continuous improvement plan, especially as MSPs with our customers around, we're at this level with our IG implementation or the implementation group.
Don't change this screen. No, continue, but I want to talk about 1.2 afterwards because I have some thoughts. I just mean don't change from your screen.
Okay, all right, no worries. So yeah, on this screen, fundamentally we are doing some things here where we're mapping, and doing some pass-fail values for policy checks that you might have, and a lot of these correlate back to the CIS M365 benchmarks. They've mapped quite a lot there, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel on any of that. But with some of these, that we're looking for unauthorized devices, maybe in this case, stale devices. And what we're doing is actually saying, hey, we've got the evidence. We can pull it in here. You have a, kind of a short list to review as part of that as well, too. And this is part of that desired state of, or infrastructure as code, in the sense that we're saying that to be compliant, you're not, within this 30-day window or outside of it from a login period. And you could set that as a, as a user, but you also have all of your remediation steps. And a lot of these remediation steps we're going to try to position a policy so you don't have to constantly come back and review. Ideally, with things like stale devices or unauthorized devices, you're taking that proactive measure of taking a look at what policies can I actually institute so I know exactly when an authorized device joins my network? What is my process to back that? But what controls do I have to restrict access so that devices are truly only joined in a compliant fashion?
Which is what I wanted to tackle, because there's an interesting premise that I love kicking around from a theory perspective. Let's go back to that fake company I predicted that said they're all Azure Active Directory joined. And let's say that they have a conditional access policy that says,
right?
hey, yeah, let's call this company 4tengineering.com, let's say. And let's imagine that if that company was set up to where you could only access data if you were on a compliant device that was registered in Azure Active Directory, that was a device in your organization, and then once you did that, you could access with this token and go to this web application. But somebody would argue, Matt, what about the data it downloads? All right, cool. We're using AIP. Anything that's on this device is AIP protected. Anything in SharePoint, let's just assume all those variables where all the data has encryption that is tied to your identity. And there's companies out there that are doing that too. There's some really cool ones. But imagine you have this ability to tie all data to this identity, and the validity of this identity is only tied to being on a device. Well, now when you talk about 1.2 that says address unauthorized assets on a weekly basis, which is the time frame for that safeguard, by putting in conditional access policies that block you from being there unless you are in those conditions I said, then you are now addressing unauthorized devices preemptively. Right. And so I love that the mapping on this 1.2 is one that I actually just wanted to point out that's positive. You're actually looking forward in how could I use this as a way to say, here's a way that I'm controlling unauthorized devices in a unique way. Right. And I think that this goes back to the book I wrote with Wes and Marnie, which is Juan and Marnie. I'm so sorry, Juan. I love you. But the book we wrote was that if I started in this company over here tomorrow, then more and more and more of the security controls like CIS, when I implement them, become quite universal in the way they've been implemented. Like if there is no data other than where we're talking about here, then that device list is the authoritative approved device list, no matter what Sonos players over there sitting on a network. And Phyllis and I have had some discussions about CIS with respect to what is an asset being changed very drastically by being in that set of conditions. SASE might be a way to do that as well. Other things like ZTNA, ZTA type principles do that as well. So I just wanted to call out here that this mapping isn't necessarily just, it's not easy on the surface. I'm digging in, you have to understand how some of these play out, but that helps teach a lot of security theory as well. But I just wanted to give you kudos on the 1.2 association with CA. It aligns with my vision.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and that's the big focus is, if to our point earlier about, if you do go modern and you do have Active Directory as your source of truth, you can really position all this around your typical SOPs for onboarding and offboarding, because approved workflows for devices joining into Entra are really, think about it, bucketized into two, where you have a new workstation onboarding, or you have a user that's going through an onboarding flow. That might just be their net new onboarding, which is approved workflows for us. Anything outside of that goes through other channels, right? If it's BYOD, if it's, we should be, you're at your tightest layer, you're on a compliant device that's, Intune joined, and, you've got all of your protections on there and all of that, but it's really hard to get to, depending on where you're at today. So there's progression paths that you have to step into as well, but you can't say that you're fulfilling that. It's kind of a partial, hey, we're working our way towards this. And that's part of that continuous improvement plan that you want to start to build that breadth of muscle with your customer around having that conversation. This is where you're at today. These are the things we can start doing to get you into this spot, so that we don't change the user experience overnight. And that comes full circle to the point of why Microsoft is insecure by default, because it's accessible by default, right? And it's not accessible. You start to lock these things down, but it's much more compliant for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So continue digging through some of these, but I guess the point I want to bring up as we're talking about it is, Nick has taken the work and team, and you and I have collaborated on this a bit, and trying to say, in the context of what I have here, how much of this have you completed? So I want to make sure, as a word of caution to the audience, like if you come in and this says, hey, you've knocked out all these things, and you check a green checkbox next to 1.2, there are other pieces of data and other things that are outside of that space. And so I don't want people to take these platforms and make that say, well, that's going to solve all my other problems. No, long term, I think they do. I think long term, as the data gets more and more rich, Nick, you said earlier, those enriched data objects, right? You got a lover in the channel, loves some T-minus 365. That's awesome. But as more and more things get in the data set to enrich it, more and more things fall under that check. and therefore the breadth of it is more accurate, right? One of the things I want to ask you though, Nick, in this is that companies like you, I think, actually take on a new risk, and it's one that I wasn't willing to take on here at PAX 8, which is that configuration advice risk. You are taking upon yourself to say to someone, I believe this satisfies 1.4 if you configure it this way. And I think there's a certain amount of obviously things you can EULA away, but at the end of the day, the fiduciary responsibility means that you have to put a lot of work and effort into making sure you're right so that you don't send people down a bad path. What are your thoughts on how a company like you has to wrestle with that?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with just being really transparent around. By no means are we, articulating that if you use Cloud Capsule, you're CIS compliant, right? That's not what we start our messaging with, or the other frameworks that we're mapping to as well. The other big piece, though, is really around, that representation of what's a true pass or fail, and being really careful about that, along with the
Yeah.
changes that we do make, and our own regression testing, right? Of if we're saying this is a pass, we better be doing plenty of testing to make sure that is truly representing
Yep.
that indicator, right? And giving transparency to the checks we're doing is some more iteration that we want to get better and better about into the platform. So that's really clear. These are the checks that we are making. But to your point on risk there, I also think, for me specifically in moving into this endeavor and kind of the whole mission behind this vision, and you share this passion a lot as well too, is like that risk to me is worth it in the sense of the reward of uplifting the community for, what we're trying to do with uplifting security, having the lens on something like CIS as a North Star, and then also being that guiding enablement, for the MSP of taking a look at these policies, but also being very particular about what we are representing, and really granular at that control layer of this is actually fulfilling this is how you're doing it, and being really careful about how we're articulating that messaging. So it is a fine line to walk, because I don't want people to come in and say, to your point, well, I passed 1.1, so I'm compliant in 1.1. Let me move on to the next one. Because if you even just go past control one, it's going to take you quite a bit of time as an MSP. It's pretty hard, to get to that state,
Yeah.
especially across
Yeah.
all of your customers. And you have to have a lot of things buttoned up. And to Don's point, you have a lot of uniqueness at the customer level too, whether that be a line of business server, or they have to work in this location on this network, or whatever it might. We had, over 2,000 customers at SourcePass, so we had so much variance, and I was trying to implement CIS,
Well,
and it was
now
wildly hard.
now you're getting to the other part I wanted to tackle, because I did just want to poke you on the compliance risk.
Yeah.
I always like to live my life, Nick, on greater good, right? I'm a big believer in making decisions based on greater good, no matter what that means. It's usually the way I try to approach things. In this case, you might not be as compliant broadly, right? Because we've talked about edges we're missing, use cases at the client, other things. But by God, on that super duper normalized data set, I can remove risk, right? And I wanted to punch you a little bit before I was on the positive side of this. Is that like everything you go in here and do and change because you get a missed space setting is going to make you more secure on that, the largest part of your identity source, right? And the more and more you tie to SaaS, and the more and more you give extensibility to that identity being the original and origin of those things, the more and more this really does secure you. So there is a huge security benefit. And all I'm really getting at is whether you're using Meister for CA, whether you're using Cloud Capsule for their free product, whether you're paying for some of the advanced things, whether you're using CIPP to take these and analyze them yourselves, finding those gaps in all the things that Microsoft can do for you to the things that your knowledge set includes is usually a problem. Even for me, I've found things in here where I'm like, man, Nick's onto that on that ASR rule, right? And I think there's things like that that are going to be really, really big. Attack surface reduction. But the point is, I actually think the greater good of doing something like this from a security impetus exactly does what you were saying, and why you started down this path of normalizing devices and identities is I need to at least keep the plate spinning, y'all. I want to be able to see it in a macro way that I can serve all my clients and at least bell curve average have the settings right. And so I think that I don't want to miss that value of security value, while it might not be full compliance value of meeting controls across a broad set. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's why we align to CIS. A lot of MSPs out there really narrow in on Secure Score, and I don't have a big problem with Secure Score, other than it doesn't give you a lot of strategic focus, right? It's a checklist at the end of the day, and it enhances your security, no doubt. If you are doing all that, there's a lot of caveats depending on the licensing model, if you can
Sure.
institute it, just checking a box on some things, but it doesn't give you that sense of the why. It's just like I
Right.
just looked at a list of controls and I just did it versus this being step by step. Here's, what you should have aligned and
That's been
kind
my
of giving you.
biggest issue with
Yep.
Yeah.
the secure score is I've had conversations with people at Microsoft.com emails, and it's just we just kind of just piece together how many points each thing is worth based on like different product managers' gut feelings, and like framework is a real tangible thing, right? That's developed in a real tangible community driven way. So I would take a framework over a secure score anytime.
It
Well, I
also
think
does one
it's,
more thing
related.
too. Well, yeah, that's what you were going
But
to say. It's relatable. For the client, it's
Yeah.
relatable too. I mean, not that I want to go showing them all these safeguards, but if I get into a point where I'm trying to show them something and I can pull up a console like this and go, no problem. You want me to mark this big red X that says you're going to get punched in the face because it says here's the things we need to do, and it says 8.4 says like you agreed to this IG1 crap we talked about, but you're all right. You're right. I'm gonna check no here. It again is one of those things that I advocate for MSPs all the time. Stop being the smartest person in the room. It doesn't help. Understand that you might need to be able to reference external things that validate your opinions. Attorneys do it every day. It's called case law and precedent and understanding of rules of law and rules of order of court, right? Doctors do it with AMA, ADA. My CPA definitely pulls out the old nerd journal to figure out how to tax properly, right? And so I think one of the things that we lack latching onto as MSPs in general is finding a standard, explaining why the standard exists, being able to show the standard in its current capacitance, what it means to them as a human, and then helping them make an educated decision until at such time they start trusting that you're making those decisions based on standards. In which case, I don't ask my CPA to show me AICPA and her understanding of the current tax
Ironically,
law.
I'm putting planning meetings together, and I have the guide, on my desk so that I can not
Sure.
screw up the annual meeting. You just got to read the text.
Standards. Yeah, traction, right? For example. So, Nick, we're getting close towards the end of the time, and I want to give you anything else you kind of want to show off that's just super cool in this thing. We get onto a real rhetoric discussion, which I love. But
Oh, no, you're good. This has been great. Throughout the app, we have the compliance standards throughout the rest of the app is more of your kind of your general assessment of your users, things like that you'd want to pay attention to. And clicking around, it's again kind of this condensed view, even things like MFA. Are you covered by conditional access or security defaults? Like, what does coverage look like? Because Microsoft's made that really confusing over the years. And what MFA methods are available? Are they using weaker forms like phone or email? And being able to detect some of those vulnerabilities. Again, what devices does the user have? What areas are they checked in, right? Across Intune and Defender and MDM, as well as email groups and then Defender alerts. So just kind of gives you this holistic lens again that you're either using PowerShell today to use or going into a bunch of different admin portals manually pulling this out. And a lot of it, we wanted to pull back to, even articulating back to the customer.
oh, that's cool.
So we do have, this is a Sankey chart that kind of shows the displacement of healthy mail versus mail that's been blocked in the tenant, for phishing and what types of phishing within the environment, as well as just kind of more of these roll-ups as well too.
Now,
And you
I'm
can
going to
even see
tangent again,
things.
and we're probably going to go over
Yeah.
time. But
Awesome.
the chart, it's hard to see the value, I think, if you haven't done like the analyst stuff. But if you see a specific type of threat, if this chart gets more red and it's something advanced, and that's not normal for that client, then me as a practitioner can go to analysts and say, hey, wait a minute, this is an advanced tactic and it's 10x, right? So I can't understate the value of knowing something like that of, hey, this is suddenly an advanced technique and we were only getting hit by script kiddies for the last 10 years. Something's wrong.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, then that focus lens is also like helping. I want to help MSPs kind of articulate the value of what's going on, even if you don't open a support ticket, right? We get that a lot from our clients as MSPs of the back napkin math of your contract value to how many support cases we open, but there's actually a lot going on behind the scenes. So you can even, white label the portal and export this as an executive summary to the customer that gets through into Secure Score, Health Metrics, CIS. And it's more of, hey, this is executive or board member that we really want to start articulating that why of what's going on and getting into some of those high level metrics of where we want to focus our time based off of that as well too. And there's other areas, that you get if you start to adopt more of Microsoft's tool set without that. That's actually part of your licensing, right? Like Defender is a great
Yeah.
example that comes with Business
Yeah.
Premium, where you
DFB is
actually get
awesome. Yeah.
it's amazing, and you get threat vulnerability management with Defender for Business, where you don't get that even with Defender for Endpoint Plan 1, right, in E3. So you're like getting an additional benefit that not even some enterprise customers get, but it's an agentless software inventory that's doing vulnerability scanning, and that's such a
Gotta patch
powerful
that, Nick.
asset, that we have as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It's huge. Yeah, and that's vulnerability scanning from the agent level, which is actually an agent-based, view of that and has really good fidelity. It's not scanning from a network. It's scanning locally and saying, I have this risk. In fact, joking aside, my son plays a lot of Minecraft. And I was dealing with my DFB database at home. Yes, I'm a nerd and I use, it's the doggo, sorry. And yes, I use DFB at home, but I kept getting alerts for like log4shell. And I was like, what? Or log4j vulnerabilities. I'm like, what? And I go and look, and sure as hell, in his old Minecraft data directory on C, in the app data folder that holds those Minecraft kind of builds and the worlds and mods, some of the old mods he was using that were still there were definitely susceptible to that, right? And so you have this interesting thing where I got way more data that was like actually accurate. Now, actionable or not, it would depend on the Java version. There's all kinds of things that come into that. But ultimately,
Well, you need to call
it
the
was just really
developer
neat.
that
So
mod and tell him to get on his game. Like, he needs better
I
data.
don't know that guy cares. He made his Care Bear overlay
Yeah.
for Minecraft, and he was done. Like he didn't care anymore. I digress, but yeah, no. So bringing in those viewpoints, and really that's the thing. Why did CIPP become so successful? Because they allowed us MSPs to look at things in a multi-tenant way that was easy UI and UX and delivered the data I needed in high fidelity. That is the beauty of API centrism, y'all. I mean, these are early products, CIPP as well, and T minus 3, and yours as well from a cloud capsule perspective. They're all early, and yet they're living on the power of the API. So I am going to steal one self-serving question that came from the chat, which MSP Madman kind of asked, like, Nick, now that you're not an employee, tell me what you think of the marketplace. I'm not going to let it be that self-serving. I'm going to tackle it a different way. Are there elements of what is allowing the marketplace to be the marketplace that are also common elements of what will allow you to be successful and grow vis-a-vis APIs? And what are your thoughts on that? Kind of as we go forward, how those two start marrying together because they're so API centric. That'd be my take on that self-serving question.
Yeah, I think that's kind of already where Pax8 and kind of your focus in and is heading, in the sense of, well, I want to take a look at this lens of my CIS alignment, and I want to see where I have gaps in my product stack, because at the end of the day, it determines as an MSP, the effective rate, or the EHR that I have, the effective hourly rate that I have with my client, based off of the margin that I have with against my tools. But more specifically on the security side, if I'm missing a ton of gaps in, control 3 for data protection, I want to look at vendors that maybe can help me fulfill those gaps that I can scale into as well. And I think that's where the marketplace has evolved most greatly, in my opinion, as we're moving into another era of how do you make a purchasing decision as an MSP. I'm going to take a look at it leaning from compliance dictates my whole business, as far as, we're looking from the top down as standards. And then I need tools that can scale out with those standards, that can give me the solutions that those vendors are also aligned to CIS and have done the mappings themselves and maintain it, because they have awareness and have security conscious focus as well too. And that's super aligned. And then everything else plays back into the MSP operations. When I was there, we built the PSA integrations, right? And that was a huge focus for billing, automation. I think there's still plenty to play as far as like aligning those vendors back and making them operationally efficient from the forefront. And then you can get them aligned from the security sense and use tools from the outside or from the inside to understand the coverage, that you have across your customers as well too. It's that opportunity explorer with that CIS lens.
And what's so cool is this is another example where tech debt will execute players that don't understand this. Because those that aren't API centric, that don't allow those integrations, that are cobbling together 2 truck bumpers and a jack handle over the positive terminals to get things done, probably don't survive. And I brought this show as kind of a delve into tech debt versus not and what it means. And someone asked in my LinkedIn stream and said, Matt, how do you balance GSD, or get stuff done, with the actual pets versus cattle problem? How do you take pets that are already running these things and get to a cattle state? And you talked about iterativeness. I won't be as polite. Everybody doesn't have to survive. Everybody doesn't. That's the way capitalism
concur.
works. It's wonderful. There's a lot of people out there that make steam engines that no longer make steam engines and didn't start making internal combustion engines. I think there's an aspect here that we are really looking at haves and have-nots forming even more. I might even have to write a follow-up to the first book because I think we're starting to see this play out in the ecosystem. This goes back to the GRC conversation last week, Tom. If it is deeply integrated, has tons of data, can talk about proactive things by finding them in the minute they happen, well, that only happens if you have an API. Okay, so that was my talk on that. I just wanted us to talk about this as the marketplace is already built and filled with vendors that are API centric. That's the reason we worked with them in the beginning when you first started, Nick, was we could do that. And now to your point of being able to take Opportunity Explorer, which is what I'm working on very heavily, to go and say, what am I missing for 3.2? And now taking the data you have plus the data we have to say, I can add this piece or I can add this piece. And that influences that buying decision to a compliant and also secure focus, right? That's the modern world. We're not going to let cars crash and everybody die anymore. We can't build tanks full of molasses in downtown Boston and let them fall apart and drown people in molasses. We have to get to a state where we have proactive measures to stop things and stop measuring things on the afterwards when it all blows up. So get off my
That was
my
a deep
high horse.
history
Nick,
dig, Matt. Well done.
I'm sorry. There's some good ones if you want to look it up. There's some fun references in there. Anyways. All right, Nick, thank you so much. And keep doing what you're doing. It's a hard world. It's broad. It's deep. There's just all kinds of challenges.
We got an
Yep, we got another
question.
comment. Bam.
Right, so, yep.
Let's do it.
So
We'll go long. I don't care.
Sad King Billy, awesome as an internal tool, but how do you envision this platform to help MSPs with their customers directly? And we know the answer.
It's multi-tenant.
Sad King Billy.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick. I'll let you do your sales pitch, bud. I'll shut up. Yeah, you go.
No, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question because it is multi-tenant, but a lot of what we're doing is trying to demystify the lexicon of Microsoft speak and security speak so that you're really just getting into this motion of I assume a report, I can absorb it, and then I have a direct translation. Part of that's, the PDF, kind of getting it more translatable quickly to the customers, where a lot of MSPs out there, if they're doing this at all today, they're spending, we've heard anywhere between 2 to 6 hours per month per client to develop this kind of holistic report around security compliance, just Microsoft lens, not even the whole gambit of CIS. So that's a really rare error. And a lot of what we're going to continue to iterate on is that packaging layer so that you can have better conversations. Because I believe if you can get that really, as far as that dialogue with the customer in a really dialed in state, everything else becomes easier because then it becomes more accessible for you to go implement more controls or to have more projects, and it increases your stickiness, but also gets you into that continuous improvement plan that you want to have and talk to the customer more than just the QBR, right? You want to talk to them every month about their security, how we progressed. This is what's going on. This is what was prevented in your tenant. These are the types of attacks we're seeing. But this is also how we're getting you aligned to, this particular standard that's elevating you into another, plane as far as your security goes, even though you're not, Mr. Customer, in regulatory compliance. But I think the big driver for us is enablement, around that.
Quick question.
I do want to sneak on one more perspective. I was talking to an MSP that we all know very well, and they're using it as a pre-sales tool, right? They're doing an assessment on a tenant and being like, "Man, this is a mess. Look at this," right? So there is also value in do you have what you think you have? Sort of pre-sales questions.
Yeah. And the more it's accurate, the more it's meaningful, and you're not doing horrible things like we've seen with some other tools that are rapid or something that just kind of come up with a bunch of stuff that doesn't mean anything. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, as long as you can tie them back to, sorry, one dig. No, the other piece I wanted to ask, just a technical nerdy bit, Nick. Do you do GDAP at all for enrolling, onboarding tenants that are below you in your with your current partner relationship, or do they have to each onboard every tenant manually? Do you know right now?
We allow you to import your tenants from GDAP relationships, but they're not consented. It just gives you a list to go consent to. I'm mixed on it because I feel like in some ways it's more security conscious because you are consenting one by one. You're not just blanketly saying we have access to all your downstream GDAP tenants in a straight shot. And there's different ways we think about, leveraging that so that you can onboard a little bit more streamlined, but you have selection. Roos has done a really good job with this, I think, personally, around like selection of certain permissions per customer with still using GDAP access and CSP. Today, though, it's a consent at a time for customer.
Do you have a multi-tenant level to see which tenants you can just drop into those tenants, though? Like once I do onboard them, they're all shown under my hierarchical grandfather? Okay. Yeah, great. Just wanted to clarify that for a question in the chat. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Nick, we've run 5 minutes over. I don't know that that's ever happened in the show, but once or twice. And we've done a bunch of these. So you got me going on the nerdy conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. I wish you the most success, both for my own personal interest and also for the interest of reducing risk and taking away threats for people if possible by reducing their vulnerabilities and being more proactive. So I hope for both of those things.
Nick,
All right. Thank you,
thank
brother.
you so much for joining us. And this should be entertaining because I think Matt accidentally just may have done the play of the day.
I
So
did.
we'll see how this goes, but
I may have
let's go to the
played
play
it.
of the day
We'll
because
see.
Matt, you still got 60 seconds on the clock.
I got it. There is further and further evidence that you get to choose which side of the gap you want to live on. Do you want to live on the world where you cannot scale broadly, you cannot scale deeply, you don't have real-time information, you can't do things proactively, you're measuring compliance in loss after the fact, you're dying from those things? Or do you want to live on the side where every day, more increasingly, you have less variables to deal with, they are more binary, they are more understood, they are more contextually relevant, and they have the ability to be done at speed? Like genuinely, if I have something pop up and say, Matt, you have a client that has now enrolled a TOTP that should not have, what if I could have that information right now? Or to Dom's point, and threats coming in and being able to see them. That's only possible if you're API centric. That's only possible if you have things that have a control plane that is modern, that isn't filled with tech debt. And if you take the other piece of, you don't have to have everybody survive, it's almost like just, I don't have to be faster than bear. I have to outrun the other one, my competitor. And this is really one of those things where I just want to impress the have and have nots.
Game over.
And that was a perfect 60-second play of the day. And now I'm realizing Matt cheated and snuck an extra play of the day in before. So we're gonna have to referee that a little better. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for all the engagement in the chat. We love it when you guys engage. It makes the show more fun. It makes it hopefully more valuable for you so you can get your questions answered. So keep that up. Make sure you're watching on pax8.com or youtube.com/pax8cloud because then our wonderful production team can put it right on the screen. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that jazz, and join us next week because we got 99 problems and bring your own device is one of them. And Tara Wheeler is going to come and talk with us about that next week. Same time, same place. We'll see you then.